For me, the biggest draw to DuckTales coming back was, of course, my favorite character, Scrooge McDuck. And I've said it before, but to me, he's one of the best characters in American fiction and is one of the best characters to come out of Disney. Which is interesting because when you think of characters Disney has created, such as Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, and Goofy, no last name given, unless you count George Geef, you'd think Scrooge would stand a bit lower, as he didn't even have his own cartoon until the '80s, and even then he's had great contemporaries, just Darkwing Duck and Goliath, and even as a comic book character, he competes with the entire superhero genre. Yet I think he stands evenly even there with the likes of Batman, Spider-Man, and Ninja Turtles. There actually was a time when Disney comics were like a standard. Now they're just sort of a niche within a niche. But I digress. He's always had a great quality to his character that has been explored, and granted, newer comics seem to lack that special sort of spark, but whatever. He's sort of stuck in the middle of a Disney toon and a superhero. Because unlike most Disney toons, he has different takes on his character, but also, unlike the superhero ones, they aren't really as expansive. Like, I've gone through a good number of Uncle Scrooge comics, whether it be the standard Barks and Rosa ones, or even some of the Italian comics, and those are pretty different. I've also read the Ducktales comics, both based off the '87 and 2017 ones, and uh, yeah, it's weird. It's weird, and it's not talked about at the same level about how different some iterations of the character are. But anyway, what I want to do here was take a look at a couple of different versions of Scrooge and go through them. So let's start with the Karl Barks version, first introduced to us in 1947's Christmas on Bear Mountain.
Scrooge was born, I think, in 1947. They wanted a Christmas story, and I figured that was a chance to invent a rich uncle. All comic strips I had ever seen, characters always had a rich uncle. So I invented this rich uncle, and I called him Scrooge because that has become a word in the English dictionary that totally describes the person that Scrooge was, an old tightwad, an old bah humbug person.
Where the character was introduced as a sort of very Ebenezer Scrooge-like character, not just in terms of his love of money, but he comes off as cold and hard. But this is all sort of pulled back a bit later. What's interesting about early Scrooge is that he's sort of relegated to sort of being an exposition character. Like, he comes in and he gives Donald and the boys something to do, and they go do it. Later on, we'll see a bit of a change to that, and we'll see what I would call sort of the default Scrooge, where not only is he, presenting a story, he's involved in the story in a different way. In those early stories, like in The Old Castle Secret and, The Fox Hunt, Scrooge is sort of implying that, yeah, I'm physically not able to do a lot of the stuff I need Donald to do. And that's sort of reminiscent of William Hartnell's Doctor, where the idea that characters like Ian would be there to do sort of physical heavy lifting. But at some point, and I would say I would like to use Only a Poor Old Man to use this as the template, because I think Only a Poor Old Man sort of does sell, I think, the best of Scrooge for Barks, at least for me. And he's more physically spry. He's got a certain spark and fire to him. He comes off as a very learned and worldly individual, but at the same time, he feels like he's come from the greatest generation in that aspect, which is weird because I think he predates the greatest generation. I'm not sure how the dates work. I'm terrible at it. I'll be the first to admit. But anyway, by that point, his relationship with his nephews, it varies. His relationship is always varied in the Barks era, from friendly to almost antagonistic. But one thing I think is really sold here about Scrooge is he's almost trickster-like intelligent. As a character, he's always been framed as an old man, and he's more fit than 99.9% of most people, let alone most ducks, but his physicality has always been understood to be good for his age for a cartoon character. And, of course, the Beagle Boys are his sort of most constant antagonists, so he's usually physically overpowered by them. So he often has to use his wits and his mind to get through it. He often tricks the Beagle Boys. One of the best moments is, of course, Only a Poor Old Man and the Money Well. He's honestly, this character here isn't a wholly by the books, lawful good character. He's far from it. He's, if anything, he's a neutral good character in the sense that he respects the laws and the customs of as many people as possible. You know, as a businessman, he needs to do that, but he doesn't see himself as entirely beholden to them, especially if the goal itself is his own personal fortune or some sort of monetary gain. I mean, there's a line in the sand he won't cross, but he'll determine that. A good example is sort of in the story of the Sunken City, where Scrooge buys up all the 1916 25-cent pieces, quarters, and dumps all but one of them in the ocean, thereby increasing the value of that one quarter. And of course, there's a horseradish mystery where the only reason he saves McSue is because he doesn't want to feel bad. Not because it's the right thing to do. He has every reason, every advantage. Let's let McSue die. But he's like, no, I'm not doing it because it's the right thing. I'm doing it because I'll never hear the end of it for myself if I don't. There's a certain industrious energy to him, which I think is important. A lot of Scrooge's best traits are shown, I think, here in Barks' story. And I don't think those traits have ever really been sort of diminished. Is diminished what I want to use? No. I think Barks' take is sort of the standard. Like, if you ever want to make a new story with sort of a different take on Scrooge McDuck, you have to always refer to the Barks version. It's just necessary. It's sort of like the prime blueprint for Scrooge McDuck is in Carl Barks' stories. The only issue I've ever really had with Barks' stories is, well, his clothes keep changing color through different iterations. Through different issues. He has different color clothes. He's the only character that does. And of course, there's some continuity problems, sort of like, let's say the old Castle Secret, Castle McDuck is perfectly standing, and then in How of the Whiskervilles, it's in ruins, and both those stories sort of imply it's the first time Donald and the boys have been there. Which, it doesn't quite, that's not true. Then we come to Don Rosa's version, and Rosa, I think he gets Scrooge better than anyone else alive right now. I just think he does. And I think the best way to view that is through stories involving Scrooge's life. I think he really, really loves the character. And to me, so if I were to give anyone a story, like the first story I would give someone to understand Scrooge as a character, it would be first Only a Poor Old Man. I think it's a really great, fun story. Simplicity often works best when you're trying to get someone into something. And then, as much as I would love to give more Barks stories, being me, I was like, okay, so you like that? All right, so here's the Life of Scrooge. I think that's a brilliant, beautiful story. And it has the added bonus of explaining the money bin. So Only a Poor Old Man does this. It's one of the reasons why I love it. And Rosa loves to do this. He loves to do it. There's the Money Pit where he does this. And of course, there's The Life of Scrooge Part 12, The Richest Duck in the World. And that reveals the money bin. And the money bin isn't a hard location to place in the Duck universe. You can see it in just about every Ducktales iteration, because it's Ducktales. And it's across every other medium. Like, anytime you'll see Uncle Scrooge, you'll probably see the money bin somewhere. So, the money bin is viewed differently in Barks and Rosa than it is anywhere else in Duck lore. So, if you ask the Beagle Boys, the money bin is this place where there's an unhealthy amount of money that if we get, we're good. Flintheart Glumgold has tried to sabotage the money in there in the DuckTales cartoon, because if you get rid of that, he is just going to be Scrooge will be destitute, and Glum will be the richest man in the world. There's also a multitude of other things in there, namely the number one dime. Now, the number one dime is viewed by most people as either just the lucky dime, or by default, it's a symbol of every deal and every dollar Scrooge has ever made. If Scrooge loses his entire fortune, he'll personally be fine if he has his number one dime. Now, Rose and Barks take the extra mile. So, well, Barks didn't take an extra mile, he just sort of flat out said it. The money bin is not just money to Scrooge. The money in that bin is the money that he has actually worked for. But it's every dollar and every deal Scrooge has made himself personally, creating businesses, mines, the cattle ranches, all of it. and he knows the story behind every dollar and coin. And that is beautiful. So this is sort of where Scrooge becomes less materialistic. It's not just money. It's everything attached to it personally. It's the man's life. And to lose that, to lose what that money means, makes him a poor old man. And again, the Life of Scrooge does this very well. Not just, with what the money means, but also crafting the story of Scrooge as a character. So Rosa came, and everything Barks ever said that had a date to it. Like, Scrooge was in the Klondike. He was on the cattle ranch. He was on the Montana Plains. Barks like, okay, there's a story, and we're going to explain some of that goodness. And what he does is he sort of explains why Scrooge is the way he is without flat out saying it. Because you can understand a character if you know their life. So we get why Scrooge can come off as cold sometimes, why he both loves his nephews, at the same time keeps them at a distance. Like, he'll never outwardly admit it. He admits it in private. Like, he'll tell Matilda that he is, in his own way, envious of Donald and the boys. Like, that they have inspired him to get back into the fight. Scrooge is someone that doesn't want to admit that he does need people. And that works. He's a crotchety old man. By default, he'll never outwardly admit anything. But Rosa crafted an amazing character. And here's the thing. He didn't do anything that Barks hadn't already done. What he did was say, I think we can flesh that out a bit more. Like, I can tell another story on this without in any way really undermining what Barks did. So, Back to the Klondike is another great story from Carl Barks's library. It is one of a handful of stories that were adapted to the '87 cartoon, and that adaptation is, well, Goldie looks all right. And then 2017 did it, but that version of Goldie is like an entirely separate character altogether. Still not worse than the Italian take on Goldie, but whatever. So Back to the Klondike has always been the default, hey, this is how Scrooge and Goldie met. Barks never expanded on it again, to my knowledge. Rosa came in, and he never told an additional story of Scrooge and Goldie meeting up. He just didn't. It just was not a story that he told. What he did, though, was, like, okay, so they were Scrooge's claim for about, 30 days? Let's explain sort of what happened there, and still that scene at the end, when Goldie throws the money in Scrooge's face and walks off, it still happens the same way, but what we saw was we got another perspective on it, and it was great. And again, Goldie is not just a woman in Scrooge's life, she's the woman in Scrooge's life. And the question isn't will they, won't they, it's just a matter of time. So, yeah, Rosa, I think, was important because, at least for me, even having started with the '87 Ducktales cartoon, going into Barks and Rosa, what Rosa did for me was sort of bring Scrooge from just a childhood character to an all-around character, at least for me. So yeah, read Life of Scrooge. It'll change your life, or at the very least, it'll be a fun read. It'll be a fun read.
For my own fanboy purposes, I wanted to assemble all of this together in one narrative, one after another story of the Life of Scrooge, which had never been done before.
So let's talk about the Italian comics. I haven't read a lot of them, so I really can't go as in-depth as I'd like. And honestly, you can sort of take or leave them. I would say they're like the '87 one, which we'll get to shortly, is a good way to get into the greater Ducktales stories, to the greater Duck stories, Barks and Rosa's. And he's a bit more crotchetier, but he still comes off a bit more family friendly. Rosa's Scrooge had the most fire to him, I think, but with the Italian comics, the best one I've read was Scrooge's Last Adventure, and its only comparable story is A Little Something Special by Don Rosa, which is, it's a story that should happen more, that the 2017 story tried to do but just sort of fell over. It's all the villains get together to screw Scrooge over. It's a great story. Both A Little Something Special and Scrooge's Last Adventure do their own take on it. The only real difference is that Scrooge's Last Adventure has Glomgold as the central antagonist, and A Little Something Special makes it Blackheart Beagle. You could argue whichever one of those are the best takes for it. They're both different because there's a different focus on it. Scrooge, Rose's is in commemoration of his 50 years in Duckburg, and the Italian one, the Scarpa's version, is just sort of, I'm not sure what it's supposed to be for. It's just an alright story. But that Scrooge is sort of, he's kind of bland, and again, he feels very child-friendly. There's more of a play towards his intelligence and his physicality, while I think Rosa tries to work out the best of both in that. So let's go with, before we get to the 87, let's talk about an often forgotten Scrooge, but I think is one of the more fun ones, and this is 1967 Scrooge McDuck and Money. This take on the character is, in my opinion, perfect for an educational role, though plays more to the more modern take on the character, but it works for the story because the idea is he's teaching Huey, Dewey, Louie about money, finances, economics, the history of money, budgeting, and investments. Honestly, the character should have been used for this more, teaching about geology, history, prospecting. Hearing Scrooge talk about the Industrial Revolution and sort of a man who built America style would be awesome. It's also one of the few times we hear the character sing, which almost makes sense. Like, the only time Scrooge will ever hear Scrooge's character sing will be, you can hear him in the background of the Mickey Mouse Club, and you can hear him for this one, and the audiobook of Mickey's Christmas Carol. But this version, he's more of a Ludwig von Drake sort of character, this one, and I really do think this is what Disney had always pictured for the character to an extent. I don't know, I can't prove it. I don't think Disney ever really had a long-term plan for Scrooge outside of the comics until they decided to do the Ducktales cartoon, and that was a good period of time between his comics and that.
Here's a bunny column, there's a bunny column standing in a row. Place a bunny column on a bunny column, see the way they grow. Bunny copper column, bunny silver column, I'm in love with you. Bunny paper column, why do you look solemn? I adore you too. How you rustle and sparkle and tinkle. Oh, the thrill of you never will cease. May you blossom and flower and rise like a tower and ever increase.
So let's talk about this version of Scrooge, the House of Mouse, House of Scrooge era, and this Scrooge is sort of my least favorite version of the character. Well, I've said, like, the Italian Scrooge is just sort of meh at best. This one here is just, it's a parody of Scrooge. Like, I don't know if that was their intention or not, but the joke essentially is, hey, Scrooge buys the House of Mouse because he's interested in show business, and it turns out he's worse than Pete because Scrooge cuts all the spending, effectively. And it's taken to an insane degree, which is totally contradictory to his character. Like, I get it, he's supposed to be cheap, but he's not cheap at the cost of scaring customers out. The common sense isn't there. And maybe it does work, maybe it doesn't. I'm personally not even a fan of this particular costume, even in the comics. Like, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, but usually it's all purple. Like, even the collar, I don't know. And the number one dime, there is nothing special about this sequence with the dime. It's just kind of there. And this was part of that weird era. There was Mickey Mouse Works. One Saturday morning wasn't bad. It's just, it was new content that Disney hadn't put out before. And there was some great stuff like Recess, Pepper Ann, and the House of Mouse, I felt, was a good direction. It just, this isn't what I think Scrooge McDuck as a character is there for. Like, sure, the education of Scrooge McDuck and Money works, but for the most part, Ducktales is the best animated avenue for him. Like, even, I think, even the more hardcore Barks and Rose fans would go like, well, yeah, this makes sense. We just have a problem with how they're handling the story, if anything. Here, it's just sort of, yeah, and to be fair, this isn't the first time Mickey's name has been put on something where Scrooge doesn't quite seem right. There was, of course, Mickey's Christmas Carol, which is still, like, the dumbest name for it, because Mickey, Bob Cratchit, is not the main character of A Christmas Carol. And of course, there's Mickey's, what was it, Once Upon a Christmas, where Scrooge is like at his most dull of a background character. And then his issues with Santa, and I think it was like the sequel to that. Yeah, but whatever. That one just looked good. So, yeah, this is... We don't talk about this one much. It's often forgotten. So, before we get to another important one, let's talk about Scrooge's, like, next small appearance. He's a regular in Kingdom Hearts. I know. It's weird. It's weird to say that. But in Kingdom Hearts, Scrooge is pretty accurate for a side character. He's crotchety. He's industrious. He's always ready to fight somebody when I think he's after his money, and he's just an all-around fun character. He's possibly the most accurate side character that the game has done, in terms of like, hey, he's here. Let's just have him there, tell a fun story, and it turns out he's sort of like, he's not a key figure, but he's there. It's honestly the best minor role he's had that I feel is like true to his character, because really he's just traveling through space to set up business ventures. That is Scrooge McDuck in a nutshell. And the fact that he made Twilight Town interesting, or at least brought people to Twilight Town, because there's like maybe 6 people in Twilight Town when we see Kingdom Hearts 2. Now it's like, oh, this is almost a metropolis. All right. Love it. Also tying it into Ratatouille was great too. Just great. Loved it.
You can have this, Uncle Scrooge?
Of course, laddie. Provide a bit of entertainment and then give folks a nice, cosy place to relax. Like me bistro here. They'll all be happy and hungry and eager to spend their money.
So next is the 87 version, played by Alan Young for the animated series Ducktales, and honestly, I think this Scrooge is the most accessible. Like, I could see you going from Barks to Rosa to Barks, but I can't see you going from either of those two to the 87 cartoon and being totally alright with it. But I think going from the 87 cartoon, it's easier to jump off into the greater Duck stuff. I think it just is. His portrayal of Scrooge is really only different in one aspect of my mind, and that's that he's a bit more open with how he feels. So he'll flat out admit that he's lonely. He'll admit it to the media that he's lonely sometimes.
Surely there must be someone you spend your time with. After all, money isn't everything.
Very busy, you see, and well, no time for... To tell the truth, my life is pretty lonely. If it weren't for those pesky nephews... Yes, my nephews! Oh, they're grand lads. Quick, feisty, just like me. We're all changed out of the same dollar, if you know what I mean. I wish they were here so you could meet them.
And he embraces the nephews in a quicker way than the other versions did. Granted, he still dug his feet into the ground, so there's that. He's willing to play around more, where I think every other version of Scrooge really just only likes to do stuff he likes to do. This Scrooge will play football with the boys. This one will, of course, let them live with him. Don Rose, I think, made a good point that Scrooge would never actually, take the boys in unless there was no other choice. And in the greater Duck universe, there are other choices. There's Grandma Duck, there's Gladstone. He might not pick Gladstone, but there's Grandma. All right, there's Feathery, Feathery's kind of controversial, I think, with the Duck universe, but whatever. In terms of how this Scrooge plays around with the lore, it's again, entry points. I think the worst one, to my knowledge, is still Back to the Klondike, because Back to the Klondike is sort of the loosest version you can tell of Back to the Klondike from Barks' version. All it really gets right in my mind is Goldie and the bear. That's it. The 87 cartoon crafts a sort of like love story that ended in tragedy because of lies of a man named Dangerous Dan, which is weird because I think Soapy Slick was a better antagonist, just all around better. Dan is more like a mustache twirling jerk. He's too much of a parody for me. Also, Duck shouldn't be that height. It just weirds me out. I think he also has the best version of the Rogues Gallery. Like, for an animated portrayal, 87 Ducktales does the best job. 2017 really can't, in my mind, hold a candle to it in terms of how he handles the villains. Like, Scrooge plays off of each of those villains very well. He plays off the Beagle Boys well, Glomgold, Magica, these legacy-era villains. 87 DuckTales, I think, does them best, and Scrooge plays off of the best. He outsmarts them when he can. He has a great rapport with them. It just works. So, again, the issue with the lore is really its own downside. Once Upon a Time, we talked about as the basis of our Life of Scrooge series, comparing that episode to the Life of Scrooge, and it was just clear-cut. Life of Scrooge took it out behind the woodshed and just wrecked it. I think the best example of it done right, just sort of flawed, is the Earthquake episode, which is an adaptation of Land Beneath the Ground. So it gets the premise down pat. We're back to the Klondike didn't. Okay, earthquakes, bad for the money bin. Let's fix that. Alright, we go underground. There's terra firmians. What does Earthquake get wrong? Well, it doesn't explore the lore of the terra firmians, and it's lacking the sort of artistic scale that Barks brought to it. That's really it. Then there's, of course, the Golden Fleecing. Now, the Golden Fleecing, as an episode, is a Scrooge. It's a Scrooge-centered episode. There's a moment of character regression for Scrooge, where he admits that he stole something, which is sort of weird, but I get it, because the Larkies, or the Harpies, depending on how you want to go it, it's their fleece, technically, so him taking it from the people that are still alive is theft. Any other time, like, well, these people are gone. They've been dead for a couple hundred, if not 1,000 years. It's up for grabs. They're alive. It's theft. It just sort of is. But yeah, if you want an easily accessible Scrooge that I think is the best of the character for television, it's the 87 version. Could there be a better take on it that hasn't been done? Well, yeah, that's true of everything. Now we come to the 2017 DuckTales played by David Tennant, and I'll be honest with you, David Tennant is nowhere near the problem with this Scrooge. This Scrooge he sort of skirts the line of parody. So 2017 DuckTales takes the idea that Scrooge McDuck is the greatest adventurer to ever exist. He's the man, the myth, the legend. Play it.
Scrooge McDuck? That guy's amazing! What? I heard he's so epic, he defeated a rock giant and carved a statue of himself out of its leg! I heard he's so smart, he solved the mystery of the Chupacabra. Turns out it was just a shaved bear! I heard that he's so rich, he only hunts for treasure to swim in it!
And the problem with that is, as cool as that is, it's removed other aspects of his character. So he's nowhere near as cheap, Marsley, so he doesn't, and I know that feels like weird, but it's important. I think it's an important character trait. It's carried around throughout all these years. It should still be there, and even more so, he's grumpy, but he's not grouchy. Those are two different things, I think. A stubborn old man who's a bit cantankerous is Scrooge McDuck. He just sort of is. And this Scrooge comes in. He's more modern day Doctor Who, where every other version of Scrooge is sort of classic Doctor Who, which is weird. It's not usually an argument I like to bring. But this Scrooge here is all about the importance of family, and he implies a story that hasn't happened, that we haven't seen, because he went on adventures with Donald and Della, and when they lost Della, he just didn't want to go on adventures anymore, which is weird then, because this season starts off with Scrooge like, I kind of want to go on an adventure again, with no real idea, or even real mentioning of, hey, Della's gone, and I don't quite want, like, I retired because of Della, so Della's still not here, and now I want to go on an adventure. It's just sort of weird. And I also think, and I sort of skimmed over it with the 87 DuckTales, but Scrooge's relationship with Donald is kind of important, which you don't quite think about, but whether it be Barks' take or Rose's take, Scrooge and Donald have this fun rapport with each other. they do trust each other. And it's mentioned, I think, at best in the Most Dangerous Game Night episode, where we see how good of a team they are. But otherwise, it's not there. That's because Donald's kind of a non-entity in 2017 Ducktales. I know people talk about, well, he's in like all these episodes, but his character doesn't quite have the same hit as every other character. Like, he's so kind of removed from the greater drama of 2017 Ducktales. But when it comes to Scrooge, he's also kind of removed from it. And I think the bigger reason is because ultimately 2017 Ducktales is not Scrooge's story. Alright? 2017 Ducktales was definitely Scrooge's story. But with 2017, it's Huey, Dewey, Louie, and Webby's story. It's them sort of entering a world that Scrooge helped create. So yes, this Scrooge is a great adventurer. He's stubborn, but other aspects of himself don't quite come into effect. Like, his life story is sort of it's never really mentioned. It's like there are one or two notes here, but there's no mention of what I think really makes a life story, which is the struggle, the ups and downs, the highs, the lows. Even like when Scrooge meets his rogues gallery, like he meets Glomgold, he's drastically older than Glomgold. He meets Magica. Magica's reason for wanting the dime has really nothing to do with Scrooge. Like, their rivalry is purely accidental. I'm thinking, why are we doing it this way? So I personally don't think this version of Scrooge is easily accessible to the greater Duck lore, even though the series loves to sprinkle around all these fun Easter eggs. It just doesn't quite get it. And I hate to use the word like it's lacking dignity, because I think that's sort of pretentious. It's sort of lacking the rough, problematic edges of his character. And I use problematic to mean like I don't view anything that this Scrooge does as a character flaw that could also still work in his favor. Alright? Being cheap and miserly is essentially a character flaw most of the time. It works for Scrooge because, again, not only is it funny, it makes sense. And again, with Rose's Life of Scrooge, it's brilliantly explained. The money bin in 2017 means kind of nothing. It's just sort of there. It's money. Even the number one dime is sort of lacking any... That's sort of it, though, isn't it? Everything around Scrooge that isn't his family is just sort of there. There's no real significance to it. We flat out heard the story of the number one dime, and I don't quite get the feeling that it matters anymore in 2017. Again, it's all there, but it's lacking any significance to it. At least that's how I feel. So, yeah, so those are all the versions of Scrooge I can think of. So, that's the best versions of Uncle Scrooge I could think of. And the question is, which one would be the best? Well, honestly, whichever one you gravitate towards by default would be the best one. But that's always a cop-out answer, and I don't really accept that for, like, your favorite Disney princess. So I think the best version depends on what you're looking for. In other words, what helps you get to the greater DuckTales lore. So in other words, the best one for a jumping-off point is the 87 Uncle Scrooge. That's it, because he tells a little bit of everything, he does a little bit of everything, easily accessible. He's a fun iteration of the character. Just great. Now, if you want something a bit more grounded, a bit more spice, you go to the Barks Rosa stories. Barks and Rosa, again, that's the original. They have a great... Barks lays out a great groundwork. The Scrooge's best and worst traits are there. Rosa expands on those traits. It's a concentrated effort. Whether intended to or not, that's what makes it good. And Don Rosa is, by default, the greatest Duck fanboy ever. That's it. He understands the character in ways that you couldn't find anywhere else, with the exception of Carl Barks, and sadly Carl Barks is not with us anymore. Do I value 2017 Scrooge as the worst? Well, no, there are a lot of traits to him that I like. I like the adventuring aspect. I do like that he's a bit more obviously funny than the other ones. I like that he gets to do more sword fighting. That's fun. That's great. When he feels a bit more like the 10th Doctor, or just like the Doctor in general, he's really great. The problem is, though, it doesn't quite feel like it's legitimately Scrooge McDuck in some ways because of that. That's the only real problem with it. Then we come to Scrooge McDuck and Money, which I think is just great. His Kingdom Hearts appearance is fun, straightforward, hard to dislike it. Italian comics, I can take it or leave it. Just haven't found one that I generally really love all the way through. And yeah, we don't speak of House of Mouse because it's like a bad memory. So yeah, anyway, what are your favorite takes on the character? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. I'll catch you all later. This took a lot more time than I thought.